The NAACP is joining the legal team representing the family of Nolan Wells. Wells is the 18-year-old who was found dead along the Mississippi Gulf Coast just last month. He traveled by boat with friends to an island, but he didn't return with the group. This actually happened on July 4th. The search groups found Wells' body 2 days later, and the investigation into his death continues.
At 4:31 in the afternoon on the 4th of July, a boat pulled away from the western end of Horn Island and turned back toward the Mississippi mainland. 18-year-old Nolan Wells was not on board. His phone was. 2 days later, a United States park ranger found Nolan's body at the northwestern tip of that same island. And 6 weeks after that, the phone that made the trip he didn't make still had not been opened. Not by investigators, not by the family's forensic team, not by anyone. Both sides say it should be examined. Both sides say it may matter more than anything else in this case. It is still sitting there, unread. Tonight, that case reached a new level of national attention. The NAACP has announced that its Office of General Counsel has joined the legal team representing Nolan's family. But the arrival of one of the oldest civil rights organizations in the country does not answer the question that has followed this investigation since July 6th. It may only make that question harder to avoid, because the official autopsy is complete and sealed. The independent autopsy came back undetermined, and the stretch of that afternoon, which ends with a boat leaving Horn Island without Nolan aboard, remains, in every meaningful sense, unexplained. So what do we actually know about Nolan Wells' final hours? Which accounts can be confirmed by something other than another account? And what is on the phone that came home without him? Because when you set the verified timeline beside the questions investigators have not publicly answered, the gap between them is the entire story. To understand why the NAACP has now stepped in, we have to go back, not to the moment Nolan was reported missing, but to the hours before that boat pulled away. Before we continue, a brief warning. This case involves the death of a young man, and some viewers may find parts of this story difficult. Welcome to True Crime Archives, where we examine the facts, follow the evidence, and revisit cases when important developments emerge. To everyone supporting this channel through your subscriptions, shares, likes, and comments, thank you. If you're new here, subscribe and let us know where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. The announcement came from Chicago. The NAACP confirmed that its Office of General Counsel had joined the legal team representing Nolan Wells' family, working alongside civil rights attorney Ben Crump. Kristen Clark, the organization's general counsel, said the group was taking up the fight in search of truth and transparency surrounding Nolan's death. The stated goal is a comprehensive investigation and greater openness from authorities. That places a national civil rights institution directly inside a case that began as a county missing person report. It follows a month in which the story moved steadily outward, from a sheriff's office on the Mississippi coast, to a convention stage, to a congressional letter, to the front of the national conversation. But before we examine what that involvement changes, we need to establish what is actually known, because a great deal of what has circulated about this case has never been established at all. Here is what is confirmed. Nolan Wells traveled by boat to Horn Island on the 4th of July, 2026. He was among a large group. He did not return to the mainland with the friends he arrived with. His mother reported him missing that night. A park ranger located his body on the morning of July 6th. Jackson County Sheriff John Ledbetter has said the investigation remains active. Authorities have not named a suspect, and no one has been charged in connection with Nolan's death. Here is what is claimed but not independently corroborated: the sequence of Nolan's final hours, the reasons he remained behind, and the individual recollections offered by people who were present. And here is what remains unresolved: the official cause and manner of death, the contents of Nolan's digital record, and whether this case results in any charge at all. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18 years old, from Ocean Springs on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, and he was known there long before his name reached national news. He played football at Ocean Springs High School and had moved on to Southwest Mississippi Community College as a wide receiver. His high school head coach, Jake Bramlett, described him as the kind of student and teammate every program hopes for, someone who carried himself with humility and led by example. He was the son of Christine and Elmore Wansley. On July 3rd, Nolan left home and stayed with friends ahead of the next day's trip. Nothing about that evening appeared unusual. The plan for the 4th was the kind of plan made every year along that coast. Boats, a barrier island, a holiday. Horn Island sits several miles off the Mississippi mainland. It is uninhabited, roughly 11 miles of beach, dune, and interior marsh, administered by the National Park Service as part of the Gulf Islands National Seashore. It has no residents and no infrastructure. Reaching it requires a boat. Hold on to that, because it becomes the most important physical fact in this entire case. At 9:56 in the morning on July 4th, the GPS-tracked vessel carrying Nolan left the mainland. According to Mississippi Department of Marine Resources data, it arrived at Horn Island at 11:14. Nolan was not traveling alone and not on the only boat. Multiple vessels departed the Ocean Springs area that morning, carrying a large group of young people to the same destination. Two names matter most in what follows, because both men have spoken publicly and on the record. Trayston Shepard was already at the island by around 11 in the morning, and has said Nolan called him for help finding a place to anchor. Warren Hudson has said he did not travel out on the same boat as Nolan, but had several conversations with him there. Other people were present. Not all of them have spoken publicly, and this documentary will not name individuals who have not. Through the early afternoon, the gathering grew considerably. Hudson described the original group being joined by dozens of others arriving by boat, and said people were drinking, including Nolan. Shepard has said he spent much of the day with Nolan and the wider group. Nolan swam, socialized, and appears in photographs taken among the anchored boats. The last widely reported sighting places Nolan on the island at approximately 3 in the afternoon. Record Hashley Cole, a Jackson County Chancery Court judge whose son was among the group, wrote publicly that her son last saw Nolan around 3, and that Nolan decided to stay on the island and return later with another group. From that point forward, the independently verifiable record thins to almost nothing. What the public has after 3 in the afternoon is not evidence, it is recollection, and the recollections do not fully agree. Trayston Shepard told a podcast interviewer that Nolan was his best friend, and that the last time he saw him, Nolan was with a young woman. Shepard said he left the island shortly afterward with his family. He described being woken that night by his brother, speaking with Hudson, and learning the group was, in his words, starting to freak out and contacting the Coast Guard. Warren Hudson gave a broadly similar account. He said Nolan chose to stay behind after the boat Hudson was on began taking on water, and that the group did not simply abandon him. Both men said Nolan wanted to remain on the island with a young woman. That woman has not spoken publicly and is not a public figure, so she will not be named here. Nolan's family has publicly questioned Shepard's account and his characterization of how close he was to Nolan. Sheriff Ledbetter has said initial interviews indicated Nolan chose to stay and that his friends believed he would get a ride back with someone else, and that the friends were cooperating. So where do the accounts converge? They agree Nolan was alive on the island that afternoon. They agree he did not board the returning boat. They agree there was a boat emergency, and they agree that nobody in the group saw him leave. Where they remain open is everything that matters. Who was truly the last person to see him, at what time, and under what circumstances? No publicly released evidence confirms any individual's version of Nolan's final moments. At around 4 in the afternoon, a call was placed from a boat at Horn Island to Sea Tow, a private marine towing company. The recording was later released by the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. In it, a young man tells the dispatcher the boat is at the west tip of Horn, that the bilge pump has stopped working, and that they are sinking. The dispatcher asks how high the water is rising. Later in the call, he is heard speaking to the owner of another vessel, described in Marine Resources reports as a 21-year-old, asking for help with the plug while underway. Sea Tow never towed the boat. In a statement to NBC News, the company said that before assistance was rendered, the vessel owner advised Sea Tow was no longer needed because help had already been obtained. Hudson has said he returned to the mainland on the boat that had begun taking on water, and that the person heard in the recording did help them. So the recording establishes a genuine marine emergency in the late afternoon. What it does not establish is where Nolan was during it or who knew. Then comes the moment the whole case turns on. At 4:31 in the afternoon, the vessel identified in the official record begins moving away from Horn Island. Public accounts state Nolan was not aboard and his phone was. Between 4:31 and 5:24, the data records roughly 2 3/4 miles of slow movement, a pattern consistent with an assisted or towed return rather than an ordinary run to shore. GPS is the firmest spine in this case and also the clearest demonstration of its limits. It can establish where a vessel was, when it moved, and how fast. In a case where human memory conflicts, that is genuinely valuable. But GPS cannot establish who was aboard. It cannot record conversations. It cannot show whether anyone searched for Nolan before departure, or whether anyone assumed he had already found another ride. An analytical review of the available material reached the same conclusion, finding that search coordinates closely matched independently supplied mapping data, and that photographs and social media video consistently depicted the same cluster of boats that afternoon, but that those materials alone cannot establish what happened to Nolan. A word about what circulated online, because it became a genuine problem here. At a press conference, Ben Crump referenced a video circulating on social media that appeared to capture an argument on the island. Crump said Nolan could be heard in it, and when asked how the voice was identified, said multiple people had identified it as his. On July 13th, Trayston Shepard came forward and told ABC News that the voice was in fact his own. That correction matters enormously because it shows exactly how fast viral material gets misattributed, amplified, and then treated as fact by an audience that never sees the retraction. Shepard has also disputed the timing of a separate photograph circulated online. Original file metadata for the video has not been publicly obtained. Crump's team has retained forensic audio specialists to review the complete Sea Tow call, and none of that analysis has produced a public finding. I am still here. If you are following this case closely, tell me in the comments where you're watching from and what your local time is right now. It genuinely helps to know who's out there at this hour. And if you want the verified developments rather than the speculation, subscribe now, because this next part is where the case stops being about a boat trip. The boats came back on the evening of July 4th. Nolan was not among the people who returned. Accounts from the group indicate several people assumed he had arranged a ride with someone else, which, at a gathering where dozens of boats were coming and going all day, is not an unreasonable assumption to have made. As the evening went on, that assumption collapsed. Warren Hudson was the friend who called Nolan's family to tell them he was missing, and what happened next, in the hours when the response mattered most, is the part of this case that is hardest to hear. Christine Wansley called the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources. She was told the agency was not sure a missing person case fell within its jurisdiction. Marine Resources said it had spoken to the Coast Guard and directed her to the Ocean Springs Police Department. She called Ocean Springs. She was told she would have to come down in person to file the report. Before she went, she stopped at the hospital to check whether her son had somehow been brought in. He had not. She went to the police department, and there she was told the case would not fall in their jurisdiction either. In her own account of that night, she described reaching the point of asking out loud who exactly she was supposed to talk to, who was supposed to help her. Her 18-year-old son was somewhere on an uninhabited barrier island several miles offshore, in the dark, and she was standing in a lobby being told she had the wrong agency. Whatever a grand jury eventually concludes about what happened on Horn Island, that sequence happened on the mainland. It is documented, and it is not in dispute. It is also, more than any autopsy finding, the reason this family stopped trusting the process early and never started again. The search began that night and continued through July 5th. Multiple agencies became involved, including the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, the United States Coast Guard, the Mississippi Department of Marine Resources, and the National Park Service. The terrain worked against all of them. The island is long, narrow, and empty, and the surrounding water is known for strong currents and a sharp change in depth close to shore. Friends conducted their own searches. Shepard said a group went out on July 5th, and that when they came back without finding Nolan, he didn't sleep. There was also a public dispute over search resources involving Todd Terrell, president of the United Cajun Navy, whose organization conducted an aerial search by seaplane. That disagreement shaped how the search was covered. It establishes nothing about what happened to Nolan. On the morning of July 6th, a United States park ranger located Nolan's body at the northwestern tip of Horn Island. Identification was confirmed by Jackson County Coroner Bruce Lind using dental records. The family was notified. The case shifted immediately from a missing person search to a death investigation. Terrell, whose organization had searched from the air, later told an interviewer that the location was not unusual for that stretch of coastline, describing strong rip currents and a rapid depth change in that area. That is one person's assessment based on local knowledge, not a forensic conclusion. Crump's team has since retained ocean engineering experts to examine precisely that question, whether the tidal patterns are consistent with where Nolan was recovered. Crump has said publicly that the tides do not add up to him. That analysis has produced no public finding. The Jackson County Sheriff's Office is the lead agency, working alongside state authorities and the FBI. Sheriff Ledbetter has said the investigation remains active and that the cause of death had not been determined. Investigators have conducted witness interviews, collected evidence, and received tips from the public. One distinction is worth stating clearly, because it is routinely lost in cases that draw this much attention. Investigators frequently hold information they have not released. The absence of a public statement is not the same as the absence of evidence. What the public can see is not necessarily what a grand jury will see, which brings us to the document at the center of this entire dispute, and to the fact that almost nobody has been allowed to read it. The Mississippi State Medical Examiner's Office conducted the official autopsy on July 7th. That examination and toxicology are complete. The findings have not been released. On July 23rd, the Office of District Attorney Angel Myers McElrath confirmed the report would be withheld until a grand jury could review it. McElrath said in a video statement that every death in the county, other than natural causes and non-criminal vehicle wrecks, is presented to a grand jury, and that her office had handled death investigations this way throughout her career. That is a procedural explanation and a defensible one. It is also true that the single document most capable of answering the central question of this case is currently sealed, and that the family has been told to wait for a process with no publicly confirmed date. The family did not wait for everything. Crump's legal team commissioned an independent examination conducted in Washington, D.C. by forensic pathologist Dr. Roger Mitchell. On July 22nd, at the 117th NAACP National Convention in Chicago, Crump appeared alongside Christine and Elmore Wansley to release the preliminary findings. Cause of death, undetermined. Manner of death, undetermined. Pending further investigation. Mitchell reported finding no severe injuries. His examination also operated under a significant constraint. Certain tissues had already been retained by the state examiner's office following the first autopsy, which is standard procedure rather than anything unusual to this case, but which meant he could not evaluate them. He has been seeking access to that material, along with photographs and records from the first examination. Understand precisely what undetermined means, because both sides of the public argument have gotten it wrong. Undetermined is not a synonym for homicide. It does not indicate a crime occurred. It is a pathologist's statement that the available evidence did not permit a conclusion, but undetermined is not an exoneration either. It is an open file. Forensic pathology has real limits, and this case sits inside several of them. Time in water degrades what a pathologist relies on. A second examination is constrained by what remains available after the first, and a cause of death that cannot be established is not the same as one that has been ruled out. Commentary from experts who did not examine Nolan is general professional opinion, not a finding, so the autopsy is sealed. The independent examination could not reach a conclusion. The GPS shows a boat moving, but not who was on it. The audio proves an emergency, but not where Nolan was during it. Every avenue that could establish what happened has either been closed, exhausted, or has reached its technical limit, which leaves the one thing that has not been tried. The phone that left Horn Island at 4:31 in the afternoon on a boat Nolan was not on. It was later recovered on the mainland. A phone is a record. Calls, messages, application activity, photographs, video, timestamps, location data, and in many cases, material that has been deleted but remains recoverable. If any object could reconstruct the hours between 3 in the afternoon and the moment Nolan was reported missing, it is that device. More than 6 weeks after Nolan's death, it had not been examined, and the dispute is not about whether it should be. Both sides say it should. The dispute is about logistics. Ahmad Smith, an attorney for the Wells family, wrote to District Attorney McElrath on August 11th, stating the family had been, and remained, ready and willing to arrange a joint forensic inspection. He said they had specifically discussed conducting it through the Digital Forensics Lab at Mississippi Gulf Coast Community College, with possible FBI involvement, and that to the extent anyone had suggested the family was uncooperative, that was not the case. Attorney Liza Park of Ben Crump Law described the agreement as a single joint download, with the district attorney's office, the family's forensic team, and possibly the FBI all present, so it would be done once, together. Attorney Eric Hertz has said discussions continue regarding a joint examination of phones connected to the case. An attorney representing 3 of Nolan's friends has publicly stated the phone had not been turned over, so the position is this: everyone agrees it matters, everyone says they are willing, and nothing has happened. Now the necessary accuracy. Nobody has established that the phone contains evidence of a crime. The accurate framing is that it may contain information capable of helping investigators reconstruct Nolan's final hours. Until it is opened, that is an open question rather than an answer. But it is worth sitting with the shape of this. The most direct record of Nolan's last day left the island without him, and it has been sitting unread ever since. For Christine and Elmore Wansley, none of this has answered the question they have been asking since the night of July 4th. They have asked how their son could have been left behind on an uninhabited island. They have asked why his phone came back when he did not. They have questioned the pace of the investigation, the decision to seal the autopsy, and the accounts given by people who were there. Crump has framed the family's position consistently, saying at a news conference after the funeral that the family wanted the truth regardless of who it implicated or exonerated, and justice regardless of who it acquitted or convicted. A family's suspicion is a legitimate part of this story. It is not, by itself, evidence of a crime. Both of those things are true simultaneously. Crump's role has been to run a parallel review. His team commissioned the independent autopsy, retained forensic audio specialists and ocean engineering experts, pressed for the joint phone examination, and pushed for release of records, witness accounts, and autopsy findings. He has been measured about the sheriff's office while consistently critical of the pace, saying his team is trying to be respectful and collaborative, but that it is always troubling when investigations take this long. The friends, meanwhile, have not stayed silent. Shepard and Hudson have both given lengthy public interviews. Both deny wrongdoing. Both describe Nolan as a friend. Shepard said he beats himself up about having left, and that he was not there to help Nolan in his last minutes. Judge Ashley Cole wrote publicly that no one in her family was attempting to impede the investigation or hamper the search for answers, that her son had cooperated fully, and that she had deactivated her Facebook account and feared for her children's safety. An attorney, Tyler Cox, now represents 3 of Nolan's friends. Their statements are their accounts. They have not been independently corroborated, and they have not been contradicted by any publicly released evidence. Both of those facts are equally true, and any viewer who takes only one of them is working with half a picture. What turned this from a Mississippi case into a national one was not any single piece of evidence. It was the distance between what the public was told and what the public could verify. Nolan was black. The friends he traveled with were white. He was found dead on an uninhabited island in coastal Mississippi, and the official findings were sealed. In a state with the history Mississippi has, that combination produced immediate and widespread distrust. Reverend Al Sharpton delivered the eulogy at Nolan's funeral. The NAACP's National Board adopted a resolution of condolence on July 18th, calling on local, state, and federal authorities, including the Department of Justice, to conduct what it described as an in-depth and transparent investigation. The Mississippi State Conference NAACP called for accountability, citing what it described as contradictions in initial accounts and unanswered questions about how Nolan came to be left behind. On August 13th, at the National Association of Black Journalists convention in Atlanta, Crump, Sharpton, Nolan's parents, and Georgia Representative Lucy McBath appeared together to call for a federal review. That call had already been formalized. The Congressional Black Caucus issued a letter to United States Attorney General Todd Blanche and FBI Director Kash Patel urging the Department of Justice to launch an independent federal review of Nolan's death. Here is what that means and what it does not. A request for federal review is a request. It does not establish that a federal crime occurred, it does not establish a motive, and it does not mean the Department of Justice has agreed to act. It reflects the position of the members who signed it, and it applies public pressure. Which brings us back to today. The NAACP's Office of General Counsel will now work alongside the family's existing lawyers to seek a comprehensive investigation and greater transparency. Why it matters is straightforward. The organization is not commenting from outside the case. It is placing its legal arm inside the family's team, bringing litigation capacity, institutional resources, and national reach to a family whose first night of this ordeal was spent being redirected from one agency to another. It also lands at a specific moment. The state autopsy is sealed pending grand jury review. The phone is unexamined. The independent pathologist is still waiting for access to material. A federal review has been requested but not confirmed. What the NAACP's involvement does not do is resolve any of that. It does not identify a responsible party, and it does not replace the official investigation. There is one more element that must be addressed, because it is routinely confused with the investigation itself. 3 people have been federally charged over alleged threats connected to this case. Joseph Alfredo Vasquez Dumars of California was charged over an alleged threatening message sent to Judge Ashley Cole, described in court documents as a threat involving a package sent to her office. Edward James Porter is accused of making multiple threatening calls to 2 witnesses on July 31st. A third defendant, an Ohio woman, allegedly made similar calls to a chancery clerk's office and allegedly phoned in bomb threats to that office and to the Jackson County Sheriff's Office. None of the 3 appears to have known Nolan, his family, or the boating group. None is part of the investigation. Different defendants, different conduct, different courtrooms. These are threat cases, and they must not be read as anything else. A reward of $125,000 remains available for information leading to an arrest and conviction. Reverend Al Sharpton announced $50,000 through the National Action Network during the funeral. Filmmaker Tyler Perry, who paid for the service, matched it. The following day, Hall of Fame receiver Terrell Owens pledged an additional $25,000. Sharpton's framing was direct. He said Nolan was not on that island by himself, and that somebody saw something or knows something. That is the entire purpose of the reward. Dozens of boats were anchored around Horn Island that afternoon, and dozens of people were present. First-hand information from someone who was actually there is worth more to this investigation than every theory posted online since July. So where does the case stand as of August 17th? The investigation remains active, led by the Jackson County Sheriff's Office alongside state authorities and the FBI. Still no charges in connection with Nolan's death, still no named suspect, and no allegation of foul play from authorities. The state autopsy and toxicology are complete but sealed, to be presented to a Jackson County grand jury. The family's attorneys have indicated grand jury review could come within 30 days of their mid-August statements, though no date has been publicly confirmed. The independent autopsy remains undetermined as to both cause and manner. Dr. Mitchell is still seeking access to retained material. Nolan's phone has not been examined, and the joint inspection remains unscheduled. The Congressional Black Caucus request has produced no announced federal review. And today, the NAACP joined the legal team. The timeline, in full. July 3rd, Nolan leaves home and stays with friends. July 4th, at 9:56 in the morning, the boat departs the mainland, arriving at Horn Island at 11:14. Through the afternoon, a large gathering forms. At approximately 3, Nolan is last reported seen. At around 4, a distress call goes to Sea Tow. At 4:31, the boat leaves without him, with his phone aboard. That night, his mother is turned away by 3 agencies. July 5th, searches find nothing. July 6th, a park ranger locates his body. July 7th, the state autopsy. July 22nd, the independent autopsy returns undetermined. July 23rd, the report is sealed. Through August, threat charges, a call for federal review, an unopened phone. August 17th, the NAACP joins. 5 questions remain, and they are the only 5 that matter. What happened between 3 in the afternoon and the moment Nolan was reported missing? Which witness accounts can be confirmed by something other than another witness account? What is on that phone, and when will anyone actually look? Will the sealed state autopsy say more than undetermined? And will the grand jury, the continuing investigation, or any federal involvement produce a conclusion at all? Notice that 4 of those 5 are answerable. The material exists. The phone exists, the autopsy exists, the grand jury process exists. This is not a case starved of evidence. It is a case where the evidence has not yet been opened. This began with a boat trip on a holiday weekend. It became a missing person search, then a death investigation, then a national argument about transparency and trust. Today, the demand for answers gained one of the most significant institutional backers in the country. But the demand is not the answer. 6 weeks on, the cause of death is not public, the phone is unread, and no one has been charged. Evidence will determine what happened on Horn Island, if anything can. The people publicly scrutinized are entitled to the presumption of innocence, and Nolan's family is entitled to answers, and those 2 things have never been in conflict. Nolan Xavier Wells was 18. He was a son, a teammate, a friend, and by every account of the people who knew him, someone who made others feel like they belonged. His mother described him as a person who could lift your confidence with a few words and ask that people carry that forward. He went out to celebrate the 4th of July with people he trusted, and he did not come home. That is the fact this case exists to account for, and it is the one that will still be true whatever the grand jury decides. If you want verified updates as this case develops, subscribe to True Crime Archives. We return to ongoing cases when real evidence, court decisions, or official announcements change the story. And tell us in the comments, based only on the evidence publicly available, which unanswered question do you believe investigators most need to resolve next? Please keep the discussion respectful, and please do not accuse anyone without evidence.